My mother stopped breathing when she saw me walk into the courtroom. That's the first thing I remember. Her hand flew to her mouth like she'd seen a ghost. My father gripped the wooden bench in front of him so tightly his knuckles turned white. The sound of my shoes on the floor-polished navy dress shoes echoed through the quiet room. I hadn't seen them in 12 years, and the uniform told them everything before I ever spoke a word. My brother Tom sat at the defense table. His shoulders dropped the moment he looked up and saw me. For a long moment no one moved. The gold bars on my collar, the ribbons across my chest, the white dress uniform, they said what I had been trying to tell my parents for more than a decade. I hadn't quit. I never quit. And the lie that took 12 years of my life was about to fall apart. But to understand how we got to that courtroom, you have to go back to a quieter place. A small town along the James River in Virginia. A place where everyone knew your name and sometimes thought they knew your story too. I grew up in a town called Hopewell, about 30 minutes outside Richmond. It was the kind of place where the same families had lived on the same streets for generations. My father, Richard Mitchell, worked at a chemical plant for 32 years. He left the house before sunrise most mornings with a thermos of coffee and a lunchbox my mother packed the night before. My mother, Diane, volunteered at our church and ran the household like a well-oiled machine. Dinner was always at 6. Sunday meant church at 9:30. And the American flag on our porch was replaced every year on Memorial Day. Patriotism wasn't loud in our house. It was just expected. My brother Tom was 3 years older than me, and growing up he was everything a small town admired. Quarterback on the high school football team. Tall, confident, the kind of smile that made people trust him right away. Teachers liked him. Neighbors bragged about him. My parents were proud of him. I was different. I wasn't shy exactly, but I wasn't loud either. I liked structure, routine, getting things right. While Tom was out at bonfires and football games, I was the one waking up early to run before school. By the time I turned 18, I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted the Navy. Not because I hated our town, but because I wanted something bigger than it. When I told my parents at the dinner table one night, my mother froze halfway through pouring sweet tea. "The Navy," she said. "Yes, ma'am." My father leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "Why?" he asked. "Because I want to serve," I said, "and I want to see what I'm capable of." Tom chuckled from across the table. "You sure about that?" he said. "Boot camp's not exactly summer camp." "I know," I said. My father nodded slowly. "If you're going to do it," he said, "you finish what you start." That sentence stuck with me. I left for basic training in Great Lakes, Illinois a few months later. Boot camp was exactly what I expected. Hard. Cold. Structured. But something about the discipline felt right to me, like stepping into a rhythm I'd been practicing my whole life. I wrote letters home every week. My mother wrote back with long updates about church picnics and neighbors. My father's letters were shorter. "Proud of you," he wrote once. Tom sent a postcard with a joke about Navy haircuts. Then things changed. About 6 months into training, the letters stopped coming. At first I thought maybe the mail was slow. Then I tried calling home during my allowed phone time. No answer. I left messages. "Hey Mom, it's Sarah, just calling to check in." Nothing. I called again the next week. Still nothing. Finally, one evening my mother picked up. Her voice sounded strange. Distant. "Mom," I said. "Yes," she answered quietly. "You okay?" There was a long pause. "We heard you left the Navy," she said. The words didn't make sense. "I'm sorry, what?" "Tom said you quit," she said. My heart dropped. "I didn't quit," I said quickly. "Mom, I'm still here. I'm halfway through training." Another silence. "Tom said you called him," she said. "Said you couldn't handle it." "That's not true." "Well," she said softly, "he wouldn't make something like that up." I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. "Mom," I said slowly, "please listen to me. I didn't quit." She didn't answer. Instead, she said something that stayed with me for years. "Your father's very disappointed." The call ended soon after. I stood there holding the phone, staring at the gray wall of the barracks. I thought if I could just come home and explain, everything would be fine. People misunderstand things sometimes. Families talk it through. That's what I believed back then. A few months later, I got leave. I drove 8 hours straight from base back to Hopewell. The house looked exactly the same. White siding. Blue shutters. The same American flag on the porch. I walked up the steps and knocked. My mother opened the door halfway. She looked older somehow. "Mom," I said. She glanced behind her into the house. "Your father doesn't want to argue," she said. "I'm not here to argue." Tom told us what happened. "That's the problem," I said quietly. My father appeared behind her in the hallway. His face was hard. "You couldn't finish it," he said. "I did finish," I said. "Tom said they let you go." "That's a lie." The word hung in the air. My father shook his head slowly. "We raised you better than that," he said. "I'm not lying." But something had already shifted in his mind. Something pride wouldn't let him question. "We need time," my mother said. And then she closed the door. Not angrily. Just firmly. Like closing a chapter. I stood on that porch for a long time before I finally walked back to my car. I told myself they'd come around once the truth came out. But sometimes lies grow roots. And sometimes families believe the wrong person. That night I drove back to base alone. And without realizing it, I started a life that would take 12 years to bring me back to that courtroom. After that night on the porch in Hopewell, something inside me changed. Not all at once. It wasn't dramatic like you see in movies, it was quieter than that. It was the kind of change that happens when you realize the people you thought would always stand beside you have already stepped away. I drove 8 hours back to base with the radio off, just the sound of tires on the highway and my own thoughts filling the car. For the first few months I kept believing the same thing over and over. They'll call. Once Tom admits the truth, they'll call. Once someone from town sees me in uniform, they'll call. Once my parents realize the Navy didn't just let people quit without paperwork, they'll call. But the call never came. So I did what the Navy teaches you to do when life gets complicated. You focus on the mission. You wake up early. You do your job. And you move forward. My first real assignment was aboard a logistics support ship out of Norfolk. Nothing glamorous. Long hours, long deployments, a lot of paperwork and coordination most people never hear about. But the Navy runs on those details. Fuel shipments, equipment transfers, scheduling. If one small thing goes wrong, the whole system feels it. I learned quickly that discipline mattered more than personality out there. You didn't have to be loud. You just had to be reliable. And I was. Within a few years, I had earned a reputation for staying calm when things got messy. "Mitchell doesn't panic," one of my commanders once said during a briefing. I took that as a compliment. Because panic doesn't solve problems. Steady work does. Still, every December the quiet ache came back. Christmas had always been a big deal in our house growing up. My mother baked 3 different kinds of pies. My father hung lights on the porch railing every year, even when the weather was miserable. Tom and I used to argue about which Christmas movie we'd watch first. So that first December after the door closed, I sent a Christmas card. Just a simple one. "Love you, thinking of you." No response. The next year I sent another. Still nothing. The third year the card came back in the mail. Stamped return to sender. That one hurt more than the silence. But I didn't stop sending them. Something in me refused to let the door close completely even if they had already locked it. About 5 years into my career, something else happened. Something good. I met Michael. Michael Turner was a Navy pilot who had been flying helicopters for nearly a decade when we crossed paths during a joint logistics operation. He was the kind of man you noticed immediately, not because he was loud, but because he listened carefully before speaking. The first real conversation we had happened in a base cafeteria. I was staring at a cup of coffee like it had personally offended me. Michael sat down across from me. "You look like someone just canceled Christmas," he said. I laughed despite myself. "Just a long week," I said. That was how it started. Michael never pried about my family in the beginning. He simply accepted the parts of my life I was willing to share. We went on quiet dinners. Long walks near the harbor. He understood the strange rhythm of military life better than anyone outside it ever could. Deployments. Long stretches apart. The constant uncertainty. 3 years later, we got married at a small chapel near the base. Nothing fancy. A few close friends. Some fellow officers. I mailed an invitation to Hopewell. Just in case. No one came. But the ceremony still felt right. Michael held my hand and whispered something during the vows that I never forgot. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. And for the first time in years, I believed that might be true. 2 years later, our daughter Emily was born. If you've ever held a newborn child, you know how strange and powerful that moment is. You look at this tiny person and suddenly the whole world rearranges itself. Emily had Michael's eyes and my stubbornness. She also had grandparents she had never met. I sent another letter to Hopewell. Inside the envelope was a photograph of Emily wrapped in a little yellow blanket. I wrote, "You have a granddaughter." I waited weeks for a response. None came. Eventually, life kept moving. Emily grew. Michael and I balanced deployments with parenting schedules. The Navy continued testing me in ways I never expected. There were storms at sea, late-night emergencies, command decisions that carried real weight. But through it all, I stayed. I finished what I started. By my 10th year in service, I had earned a promotion to lieutenant commander. The ceremony took place on a warm spring morning at the Norfolk base. Michael stood beside me. Emily, now 6 years old, sat in the front row swinging her feet happily. The promotion pins felt heavier than I expected when they were placed on my collar. Heavy in a good way. A reminder of every long night and hard decision that had brought me there. After the ceremony, Michael hugged me. Emily ran up and saluted me in a very serious 6-year-old way. "Good job, Mom," she said. I laughed and lifted her into my arms. But later that evening, after everyone else had gone home, I sat alone on our back porch. For a moment, I imagined my parents sitting in the audience. My father pretending he wasn't emotional. My mother taking pictures. They had missed it. Just like they had missed everything else. Not because I failed, but because someone they trusted told them I had. 2 years later, something happened that changed everything again. I was in my office reviewing routine logistics reports when an internal case file landed on my desk. At first, it looked like any other disciplinary review. Then I saw the name. Thomas Mitchell. My brother. The file detailed falsified supply documentation during a transport operation. It wasn't a small mistake. It was the kind of mistake that triggered a full investigation. And eventually, a court-martial hearing. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time. 12 years had passed since I stood on that porch in Hopewell. 12 years since my parents closed the door. And now the Navy, the same Navy my brother said I quit, was bringing our lives back together in a way none of us expected. I didn't feel anger. Just a strange sense of inevitability. Like the truth had been waiting patiently all this time. And now it was finally ready to speak. When I first saw Tom's name on that case file, I thought it had to be a coincidence. Mitchell isn't exactly a rare name. There were 3 of us on base alone. For a few seconds, I told myself it could be anyone. Then I opened the report. Rank Petty Officer, 1st Class Station, Naval Supply Unit, Norfolk Investigation Type Falsified Logistics Documentation. My stomach tightened. It was him. My older brother. The same brother who had told my parents I couldn't handle Navy life. The same brother whose lie had erased me from my own family. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the words on the screen. 12 years of distance suddenly felt very small. Because in the Navy, the world can shrink fast. Ships cross paths. Commands overlap. Records travel farther than people realize. And sometimes the past comes back wearing a uniform. Tom had joined the Navy about 5 years after I did. I didn't know that at the time. In fact, I didn't know anything about his life during those years. Hopewell might as well have been another country. But the investigation file told the story clearly enough. Tom had enlisted at 28. Older than most recruits. He had done well at first, strong evaluations, good leadership scores. But there were also notes, short ones. The kind supervisors write when they're not fully convinced. Occasionally resistant to oversight. Shows confidence but struggles with accountability. Those lines stayed in my head. Confidence without accountability. That sounded like the brother I remembered. The report went on. During a recent logistics transfer operation, Tom had signed off on several inventory shipments. Equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The paperwork said everything had been properly verified. But an audit discovered discrepancies. Missing items. Incorrect quantities. Signatures that didn't match inspection logs. At first, the investigators assumed it was sloppy record-keeping. But as they dug deeper, the pattern became clear. Tom had approved shipments he never personally checked. In some cases, he had signed documentation before inspections even took place. In the military, that's more than careless. It's misconduct. The kind that leads to a court-martial. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Somewhere in Norfolk, my brother was now facing the same system he once claimed I couldn't survive. Life has a strange sense of timing. Later that afternoon, my commanding officer, Commander Ellis, called me into his office. Ellis was a calm man in his 50s who had spent most of his career keeping complicated operations running smoothly. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Mitchell," he said, "you've seen the Mitchell case file." I nodded. "Yes, sir." He studied my face carefully. "You two related?" "Yes, sir." Ellis sighed quietly. "Thought so." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he folded his hands. "The Oversight Review Panel needs someone with logistics experience," he said. "Your name came up first." I understood what he meant. The Navy doesn't avoid difficult situations just because they're uncomfortable. "We'll assign someone else if necessary," he added. I thought about that. Part of me wanted to step away. After all, this wasn't just another investigation. This was my brother. But another part of me, the part the Navy had trained for 12 years, understood something important. Duty doesn't disappear when things get personal. "I can handle it," I said. Ellis nodded slowly. "All right, the preliminary hearing is next week." Then he added something else. "Your parents will probably be there." That sentence landed heavier than anything else he'd said. My parents. I hadn't seen them since the day the door closed. I didn't know what they looked like now. I didn't know if they still believed Tom's story. But I knew one thing. If they were coming to support their son, they were about to see something that might change everything. The week leading up to the hearing felt longer than usual. I focused on my work during the day. Emily had just turned 8, and evenings were filled with homework, dinner, and bedtime stories. Michael noticed something was on my mind, though. One night after Emily had gone to bed, we sat on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee. "You're thinking about the case," he said. "Yes." "Your brother?" "Yes." Michael leaned back in his chair. "Have you talked to him?" "No." "You planning to?" I shook my head. "No point." Michael nodded thoughtfully. Then he said something simple but wise. "Sometimes people carry lies longer than they ever meant to." I thought about that. Maybe Tom had meant to fix things at first. Maybe he planned to tell our parents the truth once I proved myself. But pride has a way of digging in its heels. And the longer a lie survives, the harder it becomes to kill it. The morning of the hearing arrived quietly. I woke before sunrise. Old Navy habit. I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom and carefully buttoned my dress whites. The uniform still carried the same weight it had the day I first wore it. But the ribbons across the chest told a longer story now. Deployments. Commendations. Years of service. Emily wandered into the room, rubbing her eyes. "Mom?" "Morning, kiddo." She looked up at me in the uniform. "You look important." I smiled. "Just doing my job." She gave me a quick hug before heading toward the kitchen. Michael stepped into the doorway. "You ready?" he asked. I took a slow breath. As I'll ever be. The military courtroom on base isn't large. It's formal but simple. Wooden benches, a raised platform for the judge, American flag standing in the corner. When I stepped through the doors that morning, I didn't immediately look toward the audience. I walked to the front first. The sound of my shoes against the floor echoed softly. Then slowly I turned. There they were. My parents, older now. My father's hair almost completely gray. My mother smaller than I remembered. They hadn't noticed me yet. Their attention was fixed on the defense table. On Tom. My brother looked tired. Older, too. The confident golden boy from Hopewell was harder to recognize now. Then the bailiff announced the start of proceedings. People shifted in their seats. And that's when my mother looked up. Our eyes met. Her hand flew to her mouth. My father turned next. His body went completely still. And in that moment, before a single word of testimony was spoken, the truth had already begun to speak for itself. Because the daughter they believed had quit the Navy, had just walked into the courtroom wearing 12 years of proof. For a moment, the entire courtroom seemed to forget how to breathe. My mother's eyes were wide, fixed on the uniform I was wearing, like it might vanish if she blinked. My father leaned forward slowly, squinting as if he didn't trust what he was seeing. I stood there at the front of the room, my hands resting calmly at my sides. 12 years had passed since they shut the door in Hopewell. 12 years since my father said he raised me better than to lie. And now, without a single word spoken between us, the truth had already begun to settle into the room. The bailiff cleared his throat. "All rise." The judge entered, and the quiet formality of the Navy's legal system took over. Chairs scraped lightly against the floor as everyone sat again. Papers shifted. A few quiet whispers floated across the benches before fading away. I took my seat at the oversight table. From where I sat, I could see Tom clearly. He had always been broad-shouldered growing up, but now something about him looked smaller. The confidence he used to carry like armor seemed thinner somehow. His eyes flicked toward me once. Then they dropped quickly back to the table. The prosecutor began outlining the charges. Failure to properly verify inventory shipments. Signing off on inspection documentation without conducting the required checks. Falsifying logistical confirmation records. The language was precise, calm, clinical. The Navy doesn't shout accusations. It presents facts. And facts have a way of cutting through noise. While testimony began, I felt my parents' eyes drifting toward me again and again. I could feel it without looking. That strange awareness you have when someone is studying you carefully. Finally, during a short pause between statements, I glanced back toward them. My mother looked like someone trying to solve a puzzle she never expected to see again. My father's jaw was tight. The uniform had done most of the explaining already. The gold oak leaves on my collar. The service ribbons. The posture. The simple fact that I was sitting at the front of a Navy courtroom. People who quit the service don't end up there 12 years later wearing full dress whites. The first witness was a logistics officer who had worked alongside Tom during the shipment review process. He spoke in the careful, measured tone military personnel use when describing procedures. The inspection logs required verification before approval signatures, he said. And those inspections did not occur. In multiple cases, no, sir. He described how inventory records had been approved hours before shipments even arrived. A shortcut. One that might save time on paper but created serious accountability problems. The prosecutor asked the obvious question. Who signed the approval documentation? The officer glanced briefly toward Tom. Petty Officer Mitchell. The words landed quietly. But I saw the way my mother shifted in her seat. The hearing continued for nearly an hour. Witnesses described the timeline. Audit investigators explained how the discrepancies were discovered. None of it was dramatic. Just calm, steady evidence. But something else was happening beneath the formal process. Every few minutes my parents would glance toward me again. Studying the uniform. The posture. The officer's chair. My mother leaned toward my father once and whispered something. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the question in her eyes. If she quit, how is she here? Eventually, the judge called a brief recess. The room relaxed slightly as people stood and stretched their legs. I remained seated for a moment, organizing the documents in front of me. When I finally looked up, my parents were standing only a few feet away. Neither of them spoke right away. Up close, the years were even more visible. My father's shoulders had rounded a little. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she clasped her purse. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. Then my mother spoke. Sarah. It sounded less like a question and more like disbelief. Yes, Mom. Her voice shook. You're still in the Navy? Yes, ma'am. My father's eyes moved slowly across the uniform. The insignia. The ribbons. The collar bars. His voice came out lower than I remembered. What rank is that? Lieutenant Commander. He absorbed that silently. Behind them, I noticed Tom watching from across the hallway. His expression wasn't anger. It was something closer to resignation. Like a man who knew the story he built was finally collapsing. My mother sat down heavily on one of the hallway benches. 12 years, she whispered. I didn't respond. There wasn't much to say about 12 years. My father finally looked directly at me. You never quit, he said quietly. No, sir. His eyes closed briefly. For a man who had spent his entire life believing in discipline and accountability, the realization must have landed hard. "You said he was lying," he murmured. "I did." My mother wiped her eyes. "Tom told us you couldn't finish training," she said. "He said you were embarrassed and didn't want anyone to know." "I finished," I said calmly. "Yes," my father said softly, "I can see that." The bailiff called everyone back inside. The hearing resumed. But something fundamental had already changed. The courtroom still had the same wooden benches, the same quiet procedure, the same formal tone. But now my parents were watching a different story unfold. Not the story they had believed for 12 years, but the one that had been true all along. And across the room my brother sat silently at the defense table. The man whose lie had taken half a lifetime to unravel. The testimony continued. But the most important evidence in that room wasn't written in any report. It was sitting quietly in the front row. Two aging parents, realizing they had believed the wrong child, and realizing it had cost them 12 years with the one who never quit. The second session of the hearing moved faster than the first. By then, most of the facts had already been placed on the table. The rest was mostly clarification dates, procedures, small details that mattered to the Navy but didn't change the larger picture. Tom had signed off on inspections that never happened. It wasn't sabotage, it wasn't theft. But it was negligence, and in the military, negligence can ripple into something far more dangerous. By early afternoon, the judge adjourned the proceedings for the day. The room emptied slowly. Officers gathered their documents. The attorneys spoke quietly near the front. The low murmur of voices echoed against the wooden walls. I packed my own folder carefully and stepped out into the hallway. My parents were waiting there. They stood awkwardly near the same bench where my mother had sat earlier, like two people unsure where they were supposed to stand. For a moment, none of us moved. Then my mother walked toward me. Up close, I noticed something that caught me off guard. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically weaker exactly, just diminished somehow, like the years had taken more from her than I realized. "Sarah," she said again. I nodded politely. "Mom." My father stepped forward next. "Your mother says you're a lieutenant commander," he said. "Yes, sir." "How long?" 3 years. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "That's impressive." It was the first time in 12 years he had said anything remotely close to pride. But there was something else in his voice, too. Regret. Heavy regret. Before anyone could say more, the door to the courtroom opened behind us. Tom stepped into the hallway. The moment he saw the three of us standing together, he stopped walking. For the first time since I'd arrived that morning, our eyes held longer than a few seconds. He looked older than his 40 years. Lines around his mouth. Fatigue in his shoulders. But there was also something new in his expression. A kind of surrender. My father turned slowly toward him. "Tom," he said. My brother walked closer, his footsteps slow. None of us spoke for a few seconds. Finally, my father asked the question that had been sitting in the air all day. "Why?" Tom didn't pretend to misunderstand. His eyes moved briefly toward me, then back to our parents. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said quietly. My mother frowned. "What does that mean?" Tom rubbed the back of his neck, the same nervous habit he had when we were kids. "When Sarah left for boot camp, he said you two started talking about her all the time." My father blinked. "We were proud of her." "I know," Tom said. "That was the problem." The words hung in the hallway like smoke. Tom shifted his weight. "Everyone in town kept asking about her," he continued, "how she was doing, what she was accomplishing." He looked at the floor. "And nobody was asking about me anymore." I felt something twist in my chest. Not anger. Something closer to sadness. "You were always the one everyone looked up to," Tom said quietly. "Football, friends, everything came easy for you." Tom shook his head slowly. "Not as easy as you think?" He took a long breath before continuing. "One night Mom asked if you'd written again," he said. "I told her you were having trouble." My mother's voice trembled. "You said she quit." Tom nodded once. "Yeah." My father's jaw tightened. "Why would you say that?" Tom stared at the floor. "Because it was easier than saying she was doing better than I was." The honesty in that moment was brutal. Years of silence suddenly made terrible sense. "You could have told us the truth," my mother whispered. "I meant to," Tom said. "When?" "Later." but later kept getting farther away. My father stepped forward slowly. 12 years, Tom? Tom's eyes finally lifted. I know. The hallway went quiet. A couple of officers passed by, glancing curiously at the small family standoff unfolding beside the wall. My mother sank down onto the bench again. Her voice cracked. All those Christmas cards. I froze. You got them. My father nodded slowly. Everyone. I had always assumed they were returned unopened. But now the truth shifted again. You kept them? My father looked embarrassed. I didn't know what to do with them. Why didn't you answer? He looked away. Because if I answered, I would have had to admit I might have been wrong. There it was. Not cruelty. Not indifference. Pride. The same pride that had built our family and quietly fractured it. My mother wiped her eyes. We missed everything she said. Your wedding. Your promotions. Our granddaughter. Her voice softened on that last word. I thought of Emily at home doing homework at the kitchen table. The child my parents had never met. I could see the realization spreading across their faces. Not just the lie, but the years it had stolen. Finally, my father spoke again. I should have called the Navy, he said. Asked questions. Yes, I said gently. You should have. Tom leaned back against the wall. I'm sorry, he said quietly. It wasn't dramatic. No speeches. Just a tired man acknowledging the damage he'd done. I studied him for a moment. Then I nodded. I believe you. My mother looked up. That's it, she asked softly. I shrugged. What else is there? 12 years of silence can't be erased in a hallway. But at least now the truth had finally stepped into the open. And sometimes that's where healing begins. The court-martial resumed the next morning. I arrived early the way the Navy had trained me to do for nearly every important moment in my career. The courtroom was still empty when I stepped inside. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows and stretched across the polished wooden floor. For a few quiet minutes I stood there alone. The same room that had revealed 12 years of truth now waited to decide my brother's future. I didn't feel satisfaction. If anything, I felt something closer to heaviness. Because justice, when it involves family, never feels as clean as people imagine. Soon the others began arriving. Officers took their seats. The attorneys arranged their documents. The judge entered with the same calm professionalism as the day before. My parents sat near the front again. This time, though, my mother looked toward me almost immediately. When our eyes met, she gave a small nod. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was something new. Acknowledgement. The hearing moved forward quickly. Tom had chosen not to fight the evidence. His defense counsel confirmed that he would accept responsibility for the falsified documentation. That decision mattered. In the military, accountability carries weight. Men and women who admit mistakes early often earn more respect than those who try to hide them. The judge reviewed the findings carefully. The conclusion was straightforward. Tom had violated Navy protocol by approving logistics documentation without proper verification. The action had created risk to operational supply chains, even though no equipment had ultimately been lost. The consequences were serious but not catastrophic. Demotion. Administrative discharge. Loss of certain service benefits. No prison sentence. The gavel tapped lightly when the decision was finalized. Just like that, my brother's Navy career ended. Tom nodded once, accepting the ruling. The room slowly emptied. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt quieter than it had the day before. People passed us with polite nods, but most kept moving. Military culture has a way of giving families privacy when difficult things happen. Tom stood with his hands in his pockets. Well, he said softly, that's that. My father looked at him for a long moment. Are you all right? He asked. Tom gave a tired smile. I'll survive. There was a strange honesty in his voice now. The confident golden sun from Hopewell had finally been stripped down to something simpler. Just a man facing the results of his choices. My mother stepped closer and touched his arm. We'll help you figure things out, she said. Tom nodded. Then he turned toward me. Sarah. Yes. He hesitated before speaking again. I didn't expect you to be the one sitting in that room. I didn't expect to see you there either, I said. A small smile flickered across his face. Guess life has a sense of humor. Maybe it does. But sometimes it also has a sense of balance. My parents followed me outside the building. The air felt warmer than the day before, and a soft breeze moved through the trees lining the walkway. We stood there together awkwardly. 4 people who had once shared the same dinner table. 4 people who now felt like distant relatives. Finally, my mother spoke. "Could we visit sometime?" she asked. The question surprised me. "Visit?" She nodded slowly. "We'd like to meet Emily." My daughter's name sounded strange in her voice, like she was testing it. My father cleared his throat. "If that's all right with you," he added. I thought about Emily at home again. Her curiosity. Her openness. Children don't carry grudges the way adults do. And part of me wondered what 12 years of distance had already cost her. "She'd like that," I said. Relief softened my mother's shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. 2 weeks later, my parents drove to Norfolk. Michael grilled hamburgers in the backyard while Emily rode her bike up and down the driveway. When the car pulled in, Emily looked toward me. "Are those the grandparents?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Okay." That was the entire evaluation. Children accept things adults overthink. My parents stepped out of the car slowly. For a moment, they simply watched Emily riding in circles. Then my mother's voice cracked softly. "She looks like you." Emily parked her bike and walked over confidently. "Hi," she said. My father bent down awkwardly. "Hello there." Emily studied him carefully. "Are you my grandpa?" He nodded. "Yes." She smiled. "Okay." Then she reached out and took his hand. That small gesture broke something open in the air between us. My mother wiped her eyes again. Michael walked over with a plate of burgers. "Welcome to the family," he said warmly. We all sat down at the patio table. Conversation started slowly. Weather. School. Emily's favorite books. But little by little the tension eased. Not erased. Just softened. Before they left that evening, my father pulled a small box from his car. Inside were a dozen unopened envelopes. Christmas cards. Everyone I had mailed over the years. "I couldn't throw them away," he said quietly. I looked at the stack of cards and felt something shift in my chest. 12 years had passed. Nothing could return those lost holidays. But maybe the door that closed in Hopewell hadn't been locked forever. Maybe it had simply been waiting for someone to open it again. 6 months after the court-martial life looked quieter than it had in a long time. Not perfect, but quieter. Sometimes that's the best kind of healing you can hope for. The Navy had reassigned me to a new logistics command position on the same Norfolk base. It meant fewer deployments and more time at home, which Emily was very happy about. "Does that mean you'll be here for my science fair?" she asked one evening while we were eating dinner. "Yes," I said. She nodded seriously. "Good. Because last time Dad tried to explain volcanoes and it didn't work." Michael laughed. "Hey, now my volcano was excellent." Emily shook her head. "It exploded too early." Family life has a way of reminding you what really matters. For 12 years, my world had been shaped by discipline, duty, and distance. Now slowly something else was returning. Connection. Not perfectly. But honestly, my parents started visiting about once a month. The first few visits were cautious. My mother brought casseroles like she used to when I was growing up. My father helped Michael fix a loose fence in the backyard. Most of our conversations stayed light. Work. Emily's school. The weather back in Hopewell. But every once in a while, something deeper surfaced. One afternoon, my father and I sat together on the porch while Emily played in the yard. He watched her ride past on her bike. "She's got your determination," he said. "I hope so." He nodded slowly. Then he spoke again. I was wrong. The words were simple, but they carried a lot of weight. "I should have asked questions," he said. "Yes," I replied gently. He looked out toward the street. "You know something strange," he added. "What?" "I used to tell people my daughter served in the Navy." I glanced at him. "Even after you believed I quit?" He nodded. "Habit, I guess." He rubbed his hands together. "I just stopped giving details. That quiet confession told me something important. Even when my father believed the lie, a part of him still held on to pride. He just didn't know how to reconcile it with what he thought was the truth. Pride is complicated that way. Tom visited less often. After his discharge, he moved back to Hopewell and found work managing inventory for a construction company. The Navy had taken something from him, but it had also forced him to face himself. The first time he came to Norfolk after everything happened, we sat together at the same kitchen table where Emily did her homework. Neither of us rushed the conversation. "I've been thinking about that day," he said. "Which day?" "The day you left for boot camp." I remembered it clearly. My parents standing in the driveway. My mother hugging me tightly. My father shaking my hand like he had the night I signed the enlistment papers. Tom leaned back in his chair. "I was jealous," he admitted. "I know. I didn't realize how big the lie would get." "That's the thing about lies," I said quietly. "They grow." He nodded slowly. For a moment we sat there in silence. Then he looked at Emily, coloring pictures at the other end of the table. "She seems like a good kid." "She is. I'm sorry she didn't know her uncle earlier." I shrugged. "She knows you now. Sometimes that's enough." A few months later, something happened that brought everything full circle. I was promoted again. Another ceremony. Another set of insignia pinned carefully onto my uniform. This time the room looked very different from the one 12 years earlier. Michael stood beside me again. Emily sat in the front row swinging her legs happily. But there were two new faces there too. My parents. My mother held a small camera in her hands. My father sat very straight in his chair watching the ceremony like it was the most important event he had ever attended. When the promotion was announced, Emily clapped loudly. My mother wiped tears from her eyes. My father stood and shook my hand afterward. "I'm proud of you," he said. The same words he wrote in those early letters years ago. Hearing them again meant more than I expected. Later that evening, after the guests had left, I stood alone on the porch outside our house. The air was cool, and the quiet neighborhood reminded me a little of Hopewell. Emily's laughter drifted from inside. Michael was helping her build another science project. I thought about the path that brought us here. A lie. A closed door. 12 years of silence. And one courtroom where the truth finally stepped forward. People sometimes ask me if I'm angry about those lost years. The honest answer is no. Anger is heavy. And I carried enough weight during those 12 years already. What I learned instead is something simpler. Families don't always break because people stop caring. Sometimes they break because people are too proud to ask one more question. Too proud to admit they might be wrong. If my father had made one phone call. If my mother had asked the Navy for confirmation. If Tom had found the courage to tell the truth earlier. Our story might have been very different. But life rarely gives us perfect timing. What it gives us is opportunity. Opportunity to tell the truth. Opportunity to forgive. Opportunity to open doors that once closed. Before I went back inside that night, I looked up at the flag hanging beside our porch. The same kind my father had replaced every Memorial Day when I was growing up. And I thought about something I wish more families remembered. A lie can close a door for years, but the truth, if people are brave enough to face it, can still open it again. If this story meant something to you, take a moment tonight to call someone you care about. Ask the extra question. Listen a little longer. And if stories about family service and second chances matter to you, I'd be honored if you stayed here with me for the next one. Thank you for listening.